Hey Bag Maker, today I'm not live, but I've put together my top 5 videos for adding pockets to your bag. So these are techniques that you can add to just about any bag, and they range from clear vinyl sleeves to mesh elastic pockets. Elastic pocket to any bag. So I'm going to have Danny switch over to the overhead camera so I can talk quickly before the demonstration about the different items that will be needed for this. So this is just a little fabric sample, the piece of fabric that I will be attaching the mesh pocket to. So the supplies that you'll need are mesh, and I really like By Annie's mesh. It comes in 14 different colors. This is the Tahiti, which is a purple color, and the mesh is stretchier in a certain direction. So as you can see, it's stretchy that way, and it's really not much stretchy this way. For this particular type of pocket, for a mesh elastic pocket, you want to cut your mesh in the direction of the stretch. So length times height, you'll want to cut it so that it's stretchy, and that will suit that particular type of pocket better. And then you'll also need fold over elastic. Again, this is the By Annie's fold over elastic. This particular one is 3/4 of an inch wide. It does have a shiny side and a matte side, so you can decide which side you'd like to be showing outward on your finished mesh elastic pocket, and a glue stick. So this is the Fons and Porter glue stick. I use this all the time for applying glue to fabric. You can also use a regular Elmer's glue washable glue stick if you prefer. One thing that I will say about cutting out the mesh, since we'll be adapting this for whatever mesh pocket that you're working with, you want to cut your mesh about 1.5 inches wider than the fabric that you're attaching it to. So that's number one. Number two, you can either cut your fold over elastic the same length as the fabric, or you can cut it 1/2 inch shorter. Either will work. If you cut it 1/2 inch shorter, that just means it'll be a little bit more taut, less loose. So if you're putting larger items inside, I would recommend going for the larger measurement, which is the same length as the fabric. So I have a little pre-recorded video showing how to assemble and attach the mesh elastic pocket to the fabric, so enjoy. One of your remaining pieces of mesh, and the fold over elastic will need to cut 2 pieces that measure each 11 inches long. So I'm going to show you how to attach the first piece. So the top edge of the mesh is the long edge, and we're going to be inserting the long edge of the mesh into the elastic in a similar manner to what we did before. So I'm going to use Wonder Clips to find the center point of the fold over elastic, and same thing with the mesh. Okay, I'm going to use my glue stick, and I'm going to glue from the sides to the center. And I'm going to start by placing the mesh halfway up the fold over elastic and then folding the top edge over. Same thing on the other side. So I'm going to fold both of the side edges over, and now I'm going to attach the center, and I need a little bit of glue in the center first. Okay, so the principle is the same for what we did previously with those mesh thread organizers. If you prefer to sew both of the ends first by 3/4 of an inch, you can. This is sort of a shorter piece than what we were working with earlier, so I'm just going to start sewing from one end to the other, but either option will work here. Okay, we're going to be sewing 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fold over elastic, and I still have my stitch length set to 3 millimeters. And make sure you're stretching as you sew. Okay, just like before, we're going to sew the lower edge using a longer basting stitch. So on my machine, I'm going to use a 4mm stitch length. Be sure to leave a tail at either end, and we'll be sewing 1/8 of an inch away from the bottom edge of the mesh. Now pull out one of your exterior side panels, and we're going to be attaching the mesh to the sides and the bottom edge. So we'll start by pinning the side edges. And this mesh pocket should not be super droopy. It needs to be a good amount of tautness so that when the bag is assembled, your pocket's not drooping. So if you notice that it's very droopy, you can trim the side edge. Mine looks pretty good. I'm going to arrange the basting stitches along the bottom so that I can distribute the mesh. And we're going to be sewing the side and bottom pinned edges using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I hope you enjoyed that demonstration. As you can see, it's really quick and easy to add that mesh elastic pocket. And when I do my demonstrations, I like to, if possible, orient my tips to be added to any bag project. So for my example tonight, I'm going to be showing how to add sleeves for packets of needles to the Creative Maker supply case. However, using these measurements, you can add a needle sleeve holder to any project. So if you have a small bag or pouch that you'd like to add it to instead, that'll work with some of these measurements as well. So I'm going to step over to the side camera, and again, my demonstration will be how to add a needle sleeve to any project. Okay, so the supplies that you'll need for the needle sleeve is you'll want to have the piece of the bag that you'll be adding the sleeve to. So for the Creative Maker supply case, I'll be adding the needle sleeve to the Creative Maker, and this is the panel that I have cut out from my lining fabric, and this is the portion of the project that I'll be attaching the needle sleeve to. Okay, so I have this lining fabric cut out, attached to the interfacing already. You'll also need a few little pieces of fabric. So you'll need a piece of clear vinyl for each section of the needle sleeve. So you want the vinyl to be 2 3/4 of an inch tall, and you want the width to be the same width as the project that you're attaching to. So my project is 8 inches wide, so I cut my vinyl 2 3/4 of an inch by 8 inches. The other bits and pieces that you'll need is you'll need binding strips. So the binding strips, you'll need 2 for each of the pieces of vinyl. They're going to be 2 1/4 of an inch wide and the same length as the clear vinyl. And then you'll also need 2 zipper tabs for each piece of clear vinyl, and the zipper tabs I cut at 3 inches by 1.5 inches. You'll need 2 of those as well as a zipper. Either a handbag zipper or a number 3 dress skirt zipper will work here. Either one is fine. I'm going to be using a handbag zipper for this demonstration. Okay, so step 1 is that we'll be finger pressing the binding wrong sides together in half like this. And then I went ahead and pinned my binding against the top edge of the clear vinyl, and I sewed this using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So when I sewed this, I sewed with the fabric against the bed of my sewing machine, and I used my Teflon foot because the vinyl is a bit sticky. So the Teflon foot or a walking foot would work well for that. Again, that is 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So because vinyl is, it can melt, I just went ahead and finger pressed the seam toward the binding, and then I brought that folded edge down so that it was even with the edge that I could see through the clear vinyl. So I went ahead and took some Wonder Clips. Here's my Wonder Clips. Clip those in place. And then you're going to stitch this pressed edge of the binding using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And this is what it looks like after you stitch it. Okay, so there's my clear vinyl with the binding attached. The next step is to prepare the zipper. So I went ahead and pressed the tab pieces, wrong sides together in half. I opened out the fabric, and then I pressed in toward the center crease and refolded. So you'll need 2 tabs for each zipper. And I went ahead and cut my zipper 3/4 of an inch shorter than the length of the vinyl. And the reason that I cut it shorter is I want to keep the zipper out of the seam allowance, because when I go to sew the project together and top stitch, I don't want the zipper all the way in the seam allowance, because the teeth, even though they're nylon teeth, it does get a bit chunky and bulky, and so that's the purpose of the tabs. They keep the zipper out of the seam allowance. So I went ahead and inserted the zipper so that it hit the center crease of the tab. I refolded the tab, and then I stitched 1/8 of an inch across the tab, and you'll do the same thing for both sides. And again, that zipper is 3/4 of an inch shorter than the length of my clear vinyl. Okay, so the next step, we're going to attach that completed zipper to this edge of the clear vinyl with the binding. And I love using Dritz Wash Away Wonder Tape. It's double-sided tape that's 1/4 of an inch wide, and it's great for holding layers of the fabric, such as the zipper, in preparation for attaching the binding. So I'm going to show you how to attach that Dritz Wash Away Wonder Tape. So one side is immediately sticky, so I'm just going to go ahead and press that down with my fingers against the lower edge of that zipper from one end to the other. Just going to use a bit of pressure, and then using my fingernail, I'm going to peel back the paper, and that will reveal the second side of the adhesive. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, that area that looks shiny, that's the second side of the adhesive. And I'm just going to center that zipper right on top of that binding piece. So the binding will cover approximately 1/4 of an inch of the zipper, and then it's ready to take over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch this down 1/8 of an inch away from this top edge of the binding. Okay, so now we need to finish the top edge of the zipper. So to do that, again, I went ahead and took a piece of binding and finger pressed it wrong sides together like this. And this time I'm going to attach the binding to the wrong side of the zipper. So I went ahead and used my Wonder Clips and stitched this using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Again, that's on the wrong side of the zipper. And then for this one, you can actually press so that it's pressed toward the binding. I'm going to take this pressed edge of the binding, and I'm going to bring it down just so that it covers the stitching line from the previous step. So again, I'm going to use my Wonder Clips to hold the layers in place. And then this goes back over to the sewing machine, and this lower edge of the binding is going to be top stitched using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so this is what it looks like after it's been stitched in place. So this portion is actually finished. Depending on how big your project is, you'll need to complete several of these pieces right here. So again, here's my lining piece. I'm going to bring this first piece of the vinyl down so that it's even with the bottom edge of the project, and I'm going to pin this in place. And we're just going to keep adding more vinyl sleeves, so as many as you need to fill the whole project. So here's my second piece right here. Just imagine that that edge is already top stitched, and then again you can use that Dritz Wash Away Wonder Tape to hold that bottom edge. So I'm going to add some right now. And we need to top stitch this top edge of the binding, and what that does is that separates the pockets so that it's not one continuous pocket. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to top stitch this edge of the binding, and of course if you need to add more of these vinyl sleeves over here, add as many as you need to fill your whole project. And what you'll want to do is you want to sew vertical dividers just from the binding down, so basically just on top of the clear vinyl, and it'll go through both the clear vinyl layer as well as your lining layer. And what that does is it will create different sections in the pocket for all of your packets of needles. So I measured out before the show, and I felt that 2.5 inches away from the left-hand edge was suitable for a stitching line right here. And again, you'll want to use your Teflon foot or a walking foot. So every 2.5 inches, you can sew a vertical line of stitching just on that clear vinyl right there. And then when you're finished, you'll have different sections for each of your different types of needles. And it'll be a zippered portion, and you can do the same thing on this lower edge right here. So again, you can use those same measurements. Again, you'll want the clear vinyl to be 2 3/4 inch high, and as long as your project is. So this really can be adapted to any project. And I think the Creative Maker supply case would be really fun for making a needle holder, or you can even make the small one into a needle holder. That would be really fun as well. So hope you enjoyed that demonstration, and hope you can add that to your future projects, is how to add side pockets to any bag. So I wanted to demonstrate how to add side pockets to a bag because I've gotten a lot of questions on how to do that lately. I pulled 2 bags out of my stash just because I wanted to talk through adding the side pockets, and there's 2 different types of side pocket that needs to be added dependent on the design of the bag. So the first bag that I pulled out is the Tudor bag, and the reason that I pulled out this particular bag is this bag has a side panel with a clear seam on the bottom of the bag. So the side panel is connected to the bottom with a seam. The second bag that I pulled out is the Cumberland backpack, and this backpack has a zipper panel connected to the side, and as you can see, there's no bottom seam over here. So the reason that I pulled out these 2 bags is that depending on what type of bag you're looking for, because I wanted to give you generic instructions on how to add a side pocket, I'm going to show you 2 different side pockets as well as a mesh pocket, and the only distinction that you'll need to know is if the bag that you're working on has no bottom seam like the Cumberland backpack, or if it had a clear seam from the side to the bottom like the Tudor bag did. So those are the 2 things you need to keep in mind. You also need to keep in mind the height that you want your pocket to be. Naturally, it'll be fitting within the side seam, but you'll need to keep the height in mind. For today's demonstration, I cut all of my pieces for a 6-inch tall unfinished pocket. If you're making the pocket for specific things like water bottles, you might want to make it a little bit taller or shorter depending on your needs, but just so you're aware, that's what I've prepared for today's demonstration. So I'm going to pull all my items over to the side camera and show you everything in the side screen. So I'm going to go ahead and start with just a regular flat pocket, and this is my fabric samples that I've prepared for a bag that has the bottom seam. And so when you're working with a pocket where you're attaching the pocket to the side panel and there's a bottom seam, you don't need to finish the bottom edge. So what I did was, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I just went ahead and sewed 2 pieces of fabric right sides together along just the top edge. So I've gone ahead and done that with my fabric sample. And then the second step to that process is pressing those fabrics wrong sides together and then top stitching this top edge. So I used a 1/4 inch seam allowance to top stitch that top edge, and that finishes the top edge of the pocket before you add it into the side seam. So I've pulled a piece of interfacing to simulate the side of the bag. Again, it'll be attached to fabric, but I just wanted the white to distinguish so you could see the pocket from the side panel. So here's the side panel piece. Here's the bottom edge where it will be attached to the bottom seam of the bag. And to attach that flat pocket, you'll just go ahead and base the sides and the bottom and then sew the bag as usual, and you've got that pocket right there. If you're working on a pocket with for a bag like the Cumberland backpack where there's no clear bottom seam, you'll need to finish the top edge as well as the bottom edge. So again, I've cut my 2 fabrics right sides together. They're the same width as the side panel, and I've sewn the top edge and the bottom edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So after doing that, I went ahead and pressed both of the fabrics wrong sides together. However, I only top stitched the top edge because we want that top edge to be finished, because that will be the opening for the pocket. So this edge is just pressed but not top stitched, but as you can see, there's no raw edge on the bottom. So again, here's my side panel. We're assuming that there is no seam attaching the side panel to the bottom panel. So again, you'll just be basting the side, just the side edges, and then also sewing the bottom edge using an 1/8 inch just to make that an actual pocket for that Cumberland backpack or whatever bag you're working on that does not have a bottom seam attached to the side panel. So I also wanted to show you a couple different other pockets. So I wanted to show you a gathered pocket. So for example, not a flat pocket, but a pocket with a little bit of give. So for example, if you're placing a water bottle inside. So again, I've got my two fabrics, right sides together. It's the same width as the other pocket that I showed you previously, which is 5 inches across the bottom because I'm allowing for a 5-inch wide side panel. However, as you can see, it kind of veers out on the two side edges. So I measured out 2 inches. So this is 2 inches out from the top edge, and same thing over here to give it a little bit of extra width on the top edge. Again, I sewed the pieces right sides together using 1/4 of an inch along that top edge. And then I pressed those two fabrics so that they were wrong sides together. So it looks like this. Okay, so next my top stitching is going to be a little bit different. So for this particular example, I decided to top stitch 1 inch down from the finished edge. So this was the finished edge that I pressed. And I top stitched 1 inch down from that edge. So the reason that I top stitched 1 inch down from that edge is that I wanted to make a casing for elastic. And since this casing is 1 inch wide, you can use a variety of different widths of elastic. I went ahead and pulled out 1/8 of an inch wide elastic, but you can use 1/2 inch wide, 3/4 of an inch, whatever you have on hand. And I find it easier to thread elastic through casings using a bodkin. So this is a simple bodkin. I like it better than a safety pin because I've ripped many safety pins out through the process in the past. And so what the bodkin does is it just kind of grips the end of the elastic, and you push this metal circle down and it holds it firmly in place so that it doesn't come unhooked. So you just kind of push that elastic through and make sure you, of course, anchor the other end with either a pin or with stitching. And I'm going to do that in just a second when I pull my bodkin further through. So I'm going to take my Wonder Clip and hold that elastic in place until I can sew it in place. And then you pull the elastic through the other end and it gathers the pocket so that you can attach it to the side panel. Again, this is for a pocket attached to a bag with a clear side and bottom seam. So again, I'm going to pull my side panel piece out, and I'm just going to go ahead and pin that fabric so that it's even with the side edge of my side panel. And grab some more Wonder Clips from over here. And again, you want to make sure that the bottom and the side edges are aligned. And then you'll just baste those in place. So when I come to this side edge, I know I've got my bodkin hanging through that. Let me move that out of the way. And then you'll just pin that in place. And then you have a nice gathered pocket, and you have room to place a water bottle or other items inside. Let me get that hooked on. There you go. See, as you can see, you can fit other items inside. So this is the gathered pocket for a pocket with a bottom seam. And again, if you're making one with no clear bottom seam, you'll just want to sew these right sides together so that you have that bottom edge finished so that you can attach it in the middle of your side panel. Okay, so I have one last pocket to show you just because I had to think of all the different options, and that was for, I had a request for a pocket with mesh. So first of all, for a pocket with mesh, you need to finish the top or both the top and the bottom edges with binding so that you don't have just raw mesh showing on your bag. So for this particular example, because I'm using the 1/8 of an inch wide elastic, I cut my binding strips 2.5 inches wide by the top edge of the fabric. So again, I'm using the gathered pocket, and I measured 2 inches out from each side just to give myself room for the gathering. If you're using wider elastic, if you're using 1/4 of an inch wide elastic, you'll want to use a binding strip that's not 2.5 inches wide, but 3 inches wide. Okay, so again, here's my binding that I cut 2.5 inches. And I went ahead and sewed it to the top edge of my piece of mesh using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so again, I'm going to cut my elastic to the same width as the bottom of the pocket because that's what I preferred as far as that goes. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna press the seam away from the mesh and then bring that folded edge of the binding down so that it meets the edge on the opposite side. So that creates a really tiny casing to thread your elastic through. And then just go ahead and top stitch this lower edge using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I've got another little step out prepared for that. So as you can see, here's my binding. It has a nice finished edge on the top. And as I said, if you're not sewing this bottom edge into a seam, you'll want to attach the binding to the bottom edge as well. So let me show you how to get that elastic inside the binding to make it a gathered pocket. So again, I'm going to use my bodkin and securely attach the edge of the bodkin to the elastic so that it doesn't come undone. And then I'm just going to go ahead and thread that bodkin through the binding, and it's a tight fit. Again, like I mentioned, if you're going to be using wider elastic, you want to cut your fabric piece wider, so 3 inches wide instead. All right, let me get that going inside. And then you'll just want to thread that all the way through. Oh, I think I caught that on something. Let me try it through the opposite end. All right. Okay, so as I pull the elastic through, again, you want to anchor that elastic so that you don't pull it all the way through the casing. When I was practicing this before, I got a little too ambitious and I pulled the elastic all the way through, and then I removed the bodkin so that I actually had elastic stuck in my fabric. So you don't want that to let that happen. As you pull a little bit more through, you want to make sure you get that secured with a pin. And then of course you'll want to stitch that in place. And then I'm going to pull the bodkin through the other end. Okay, so I'm going to remove the bodkin and just go ahead and put a wonder clip in place. And then let me show you what it looks like attached to what I'm using as my side panel. So as you can see, it has nice gathers, and you want to make sure you get everything pinned in place so that you can stitch it to your side panel. And again, if you need to have the bottom edge of that pocket finished, make sure you add the binding to the bottom edge as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pin it up the sides just so that I can show you what it looks like all finished and nice and gathered. And then you'll just want to stitch this down, again, the sides and the bottom using 1/8 of an inch seam. And then as you construct your bag, you'll cover those seams when you sew the side panel to the front and the back of the bag and to the bottom edge. So that's a really nice gathered pocket for your water bottles or other things inside your bag. And that's my rather long-winded demonstration on how to add several different types of pockets if it's not included in the instructions. So again, that looks pretty neat. It seems pretty easy to do, and you can use my general guidelines and measurements to add either of those 3 styles of pocket to any bag that you're making. In this segment, I'll be demonstrating how to add a mesh zipper pocket to your bag. Now it's time to grab your piece of mesh and one of your binding strips. So I'm just going to finger press that binding wrong sides together in half. And I'm going to pin this in place to the top edge of the mesh. And depending on which direction you cut your mesh, one direction is not stretchy and one direction is a little bit stretchy. So depending on which way you cut the mesh, it might stretch out a little bit. It's fine if it stretches out a little bit longer. We can always trim that mesh down after we've gotten it sewn in place to the lining of the bag. I'm going to sew this pinned edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but it's really important to sew with the fabric against the bed of your sewing machine because there's so many gaps and holes in the mesh. It's a bit harder to sew with it against the bottom of your machine. So just make sure that the fabric is face down. Okay, now we're going to press the seam up toward the binding. And it's fine to press the mesh, it's not going to melt or anything like that. Okay, and now we're going to bring that folded edge of the binding down so that it meets the opposite side. Okay, and just use the Wonder Clips to clip that in place. Okay, we're going to sew this lower edge 1/8 of an inch away from the fabric. Okay, after I sew the binding to the mesh, as you can see, usually it looks a bit wavy, so just hit it with your iron really quick to smooth it out. Okay, and then next we'll be attaching the zipper. And for attaching the zipper to the binding and the mesh, I like to use this Dritz Wonder Tape, and it's 1/4 of an inch wide, and it's a double-sided adhesive. So one side is sticky, which will attach to the zipper first, and then once that's stuck down, the paper just peels away. So here's the zipper, and I'm just going to stick that wash away Wonder Tape to the very lower edge of the zipper. And in the pattern, I instruct for this portion to be used with an all-purpose skirt and dress zipper, just like we did with the pouch. But I actually didn't have any zippers in the color that I liked to match my lining and my exterior fabrics in the skirt and dress zipper. So here I'm using a handbag zipper. But in the pattern, you're directed to use that all-purpose skirt and dress zipper. Okay, so just push that down with your fingers, and then one side of the paper will just start to peel off, and it'll reveal the second side of the adhesive. And this makes it definitely a lot easier to insert the zipper because the binding and the mesh kind of want to stretch out as you sew it in place. And by sticking it down first, you'll be assured that things won't look stretched out. Okay, and you'll just want to cover the binding on that zipper tape halfway. Okay, and we're going to take this over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew that top edge of the binding 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. And actually before I lied when I said we wouldn't need the zipper foot anymore. Depending on if you're using the handbag zipper like I am, or as called for in the pattern, the all-purpose zipper, you might not be able to get close enough to the binding with your regular foot. So if that's the case, you might need to switch out to your zipper foot. But try it with your regular foot first. Depending on your zipper, you might be okay. Okay, so this is the right side of the zipper. For this last piece of binding, I'm actually going to flip to the wrong side of the zipper. So here's my last piece of binding, and to make it simple, I'm just going to use, again, the Wonder Tape on the top edge of the zipper tape, right up against the edge. Okay, and I'm going to finger press that binding wrong sides together, and the raw edge of the binding is going to be placed on that top edge of the zipper. And again, wrong side of the zipper here. Okay, and then just use some Wonder clips to secure it. And we're going to be sewing this pinned edge 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. Okay, so I've got my mesh laid out so that the right side of the zipper is facing out. And I'm just going to press that seam toward that, up toward the folded edge of the binding. Okay, now I'm just going to bring that binding down so that it covers the stitch line. And then I'll use my Wonder clips to secure it in place. So as you'll notice, my zipper's a little bit longer than the binding and the mesh. And I'm going to wait to trim that zipper down until I've attached it to the lining with that zippered pouch. So if your zipper is longer as well, just leave it in place for now. No need to trim it yet. Okay, so I'm going to sew that lower edge of the binding 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. Okay, now it's time to attach the mesh to that lining main panel with that zipper pouch already attached to it. So the bottom edge of the mesh is going to be even with the bottom edge of the lining fabric, and the side edges should also be aligned. If you're working with a longer zipper, make sure that zipper head is within the side edges of the lining main panel. And then go ahead and just use Wonder clips to secure everything in place. And if you feel more comfortable, you can use that Dritz wash away tape to secure that top edge of the binding. Okay, we're going to sew the top edge of the binding 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric, and we're also going to sew the sides and the bottom 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the lining fabric. So you can see the lining fabric through the mesh, so you want to follow that curve when you get to those two bottom corners. And I'm just going to use my zipper to trim, my scissors to trim the overhang of the zipper, if there is any. And then same thing on that bottom corner with the mesh. Just trim the overhang and do the same thing for the other side. Okay, so this first set of instructions is for installing a small zipper pocket, and this will work for any size bag, so small, medium, or large. And just so you can get a taste of what size the finished pocket will be, it'll fit a cell phone inside of it. Okay, so I've already prepared the area where I'll be inserting the zipper pocket. So this is theoretically the front of the bag, the lining. So I've already got my lining fabric with the ShapeFlex interfacing attached to it. If you'd like to insert your zipper pocket on the outside of the bag, it'll just be the exterior fabric, and again, make sure that the interfacing is attached to the fabric. Okay, so here's my zipper pocket fabric. And for a small pocket, I've cut my fabric piece 8 inches by 12 inches. So for a small pocket, that's the size you want to cut your zipper pocket fabric. I'm not using any interfacing on my zipper pocket. If you choose to use some, I'd suggest using ShapeFlex interfacing. Okay, so I'm going to flip to the wrong side of the fabric. And I always like to mark a T at the top of the fabric. That's just sort of a safeguard, so when I'm measuring things, I don't get mixed up which edge is the top edge. If I draw the T on there, then I know that's the top edge. Okay, so I'm going to take my ruler out and measure 6 1/4 inches down from that top edge. So again, that's 6 1/4 inches down, and I'm going to draw a horizontal line. I'm using a friction pen, but you can use chalk or whatever your favorite marking tool is. Okay, so there's that first line. I'm going to draw a second line that's a 1/2 inch below the first line. Okay, now I'm going to draw 2 vertical lines, each 1 inch in from the side edges. Okay, now it's time to place the zipper pocket fabric on top of my lining piece. Okay, so the fabrics will be right sides together, and you want to orient that rectangle, which will be where the zipper will be, how you want it on the bag. I usually like to keep it at least 1 inch or 2 down from the top edge, but just visually keep in mind that this is where that zipper is going to be. So orient it on your fabric. Again, your bag might look different than my rectangle. It might be a shape, and that's okay. And you always want to make sure that it's level. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to situate mine 1 inch up from the bottom. But again, visually where you want that rectangle to be, it's up to you. And you want to make sure it's centered also. So you can either measure with your ruler from each of the side edges, or you can finger press the fabric in half and then center it that way. So if you like to do that, you would finger press the zipper pocket fabric in half and finger press the lining fabric in half, and use the crease from the finger pressing to orient the fabric. So either method is fine, it's up to you. Okay, then I always like to put a couple of pins at the top and the bottom just to hold the fabric in place. And I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and stitch directly on top of the lines that I drew to form a rectangular box. Okay, I'm using a 2mm stitch length, and make sure you backstitch at start and stop. Okay, when you pivot at any of the corners, if you find that you're not coming down exactly in the corner, feel free to shorten your stitch length. So I'm shortening mine to 1.5 mm, and that'll help you come down exactly in the corner. And then turn it back to your regular stitch length. Mine's 2.5 mm. Okay, so now I'm going to draw a line that's directly in the middle of the box, so it's going to be 1/4 of an inch up, and the line is going to start and stop 1/4 of an inch from each end. Okay, where you started and stopped the line, draw an outward facing V. Okay, now we're going to cut on the line through both layers of fabric, and I always like to use my seam ripper to get a hole started, and then my scissors the rest of the way. Okay, now I'm going to push the pocket through the opening and press. So that zipper pocket fabric will be spread open like that, and I'm going to press from the right side of the lining piece. If when you're pressing you notice your corners look bunched up, that means that you didn't cut far enough into the V. So if that's the case, push the pocket back through and recut the V, cutting as far into the corner as you can without cutting the stitching. And then I'm using my fingers to sort of roll out the seams so that the fabrics are wrong sides together. Okay, so you should have a nice window opening over here. Now it's time to sew the zipper in place. So for this size zipper pocket, you need at least a 9-inch zipper, and if you have a zipper that's longer, that's perfectly fine. My favorite method to attach zipper pockets is to use Dritz Wash Away Wonder Tape. So it's 1/4 of an inch wide tape, and it's got a paper backing on one side. So one side is sticky, and then after you stick the first side in place, you peel back the paper and it reveals the second side of the adhesive. I like using this instead of pins because pinning a zipper to the fabric, the pins make the zipper wavy, so then when you sew the zipper in place, it looks wavy as well. But this Wash Away Wonder Tape is really handy, and you don't have to do anything. You don't even have to wash it after you sew the zipper in. Okay, so what I'm going to do is put the Wash Away Wonder Tape just on the area where the zipper will be sewn in place. I always like to avoid the end of the zipper because that metal zipper stop will break a needle. And I also like to avoid the beginning of the zipper because it has that sort of weird little gap over there. So I'm going to shoot for right in the middle of the zipper. And I'm placing the tape down right at the top edge of the zipper tape. And just use your fingertips to give it a little bit of pressure. If you don't have any of this Wash Away Wonder Tape handy, you can also use a washable glue stick. Okay, so then I'm just going to use my fingernail to peel back a corner of the tape. And then there's that second side of the adhesive. Okay, so now I'm going to have the zipper face up, and I'm going to bring that opening from the lining fabric right on top. And you want equal amounts of the zipper tape to be showing on top and bottom. You don't want the fabric pulled up tight against the teeth. You want the zipper tape to be showing like that. Okay, and you'll notice that zipper head's over here. It's off the edge of the fabric. We'll deal with that in a little bit. So I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. Usually there's no need to use a zipper foot because the fabric and the interfacing sort of elevates the fabric above the zipper tape. I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. I'm going to start over here, work my way around the rectangle, and when I reach approximately here, I'm going to stop with the needle down, lift the presser foot up, pull this head past the presser foot, and then finish the rest of the rectangle. Okay, now you'll notice there's some overhang of the zipper, so I'm going to flip to the wrong side, and I'm going to trim the zipper within about 1/4 of an inch of that stitching line on both sides. Okay, so now I'm going to flip down this top edge of the fabric so that it meets this bottom edge of the zipper pocket over here. And feel free to pin that in place, and I'm going to sew the 3 raw edges using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, except I'm not going to sew on top of this lining piece at all. So when I get to that top corner, I'm going to just push it out of the way just like this. Okay, there's your completed small zipper pocket, and it's ready to sew this piece into the rest of the bag. Okay, so now here's instructions on how to insert a large zipper pocket. So this is great for large bags, travel bags. So here's my bag fabric, and again I'm attaching the zipper pocket to lining, so my lining fabric is already attached to the Shapeflex interfacing. And here's my zipper pocket for the large pocket. So I've cut my fabric to 11 inches by 20 inches. Okay, so again I'm going to draw a T at the top edge, just so I don't get things mixed up when I'm measuring. And I'm going to draw a line that's 10.5 inches down from the top edge. Okay, I'm going to draw a second line that's a 1/2 inch below the first. And then I'm going to draw 2 vertical lines that are each 1 inch in from the side edges. Okay, now I'm going to take my marked zipper pocket, make sure that T stays at the top, and I'm going to pull out that lining piece again. And since your bag will probably be different shapes than mine, you just want to make sure again that that rectangle is clear by the top edge by at least 1 to 2 inches, and you want to make sure that it's centered. Okay, so I'm going to place pins at the top and the bottom just to hold the fabric in place. And I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew right on top of the stitches, the line that I drew to form a rectangular box. Okay, so again, we're going to be drawing a line that's halfway up, so 1/4 of an inch up, and it's going to start and stop 1/4 of an inch away from each end. And then again, draw the outward facing V's. And I'm going to cut on the line and use my seam ripper to get that opening started. Okay, and then push the pocket fabric through the opening and press. So again, those pocket fabrics will be spread apart like that, and I'm going to press from the lining side. Okay, so if you're making the large pocket, you want your zipper to be at least 12 inches long. And again, if it's longer than 12 inches, that's fine. And again, I'm going to use that Dritz Wash Away Wonder Tape to secure the zipper. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that the zipper's right side facing up, and then place that opening right on top. Okay, again, we're going to be using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance to sew around the edge of the rectangle, and when you get to the corner where that zipper pull is, just stop with the needle down, lift the presser foot up, and then pull the head past your foot so you can finish the rectangle. Okay, so I noticed when I was sewing that I can see a little of the adhesive showing in certain areas. Because it's wash away, I'm just going to take a spray bottle and spritz that area with some water and the adhesive will go away. Okay, so to finish off the zipper, again, I'm going to clip within 1/4 of an inch away from the stitching line. And then I'm going to fold this top edge down. Okay, again, I'm going to sew the 3 raw edges using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and make sure the lining is pushed back out of the way. Okay, so using my measurements, you can install a zipper pocket in either a large bag or any size bag with the small pocket. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you again next Sunday for Social Sunday.